Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast and to another quarterly book review episode. I'll say it. This book review video is it's a little bit more sparse than past book review episodes. But nonetheless, we still read some good ones. And so we're going to share some of those good ones with you in this episode. If you do enjoy this episode or any of our episodes, we would love it if you're able to share that episode with someone that you think might enjoy it or even benefit from it. And if you ever have the time to leave a rating or a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, that also is extremely helpful to us. And if you watch our podcast on YouTube, if you hit the subscribe button, if you like the video, if you comment, all those things are very helpful as well. And also, I know we've said this, I'm going to say one more thing. We love it when you guys go to our website and you leave questions in our question box. That gives us so much food for thought in our home, and it feels a little bit like I say that I was going to say it's like a dialogue, but it's still not. But we get to hear a little bit more about your lives, what you're going through in your home, and the things that the challenges you're facing, or some of the things you're learning, and that's helpful to us. Gives us a little bit more context. Again, I know it's not a dialogue. It's still just us, talking over here, but it is fun to hear more about your lives. So thank you for taking the time to go and submit questions over there in the question box. With that said, let's get this thing rolling.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Okay, so when Elisha brought up, we could do a book review video or for the podcast, I was like, I don't think I read hardly anything this quarter. And then I saw Elisha's stack of books and I got intimidated. Could see some giant ones over there.
Well, you've read some of these too. I can give some of them to you because I know you've gone through some of these.
Not this quarter, though, that I know of. Okay, maybe I'll get taken off guard. And then I did find, though, that I was like, the books I have read, I've really, really enjoyed. And so I did pull some of the books that I've read with the kids this year, or this quarter, because that was some of just the reading that I did. And that's the fun thing, I guess, about having those built-in reading times with the kids, is that I'm still able to enjoy reading even when I'm not personally reading a lot.
Well, I think my stack is a little bit deceiving because I pulled some books that I have read in years past that I didn't fully read this last quarter, but I kind of referenced because of some guests that we were having on the podcast, or I can't remember, or other reasons, right? Like I'm reading the sequel to one of them, so I thought I'd pull them both out and talk about both of them, even though I haven't read all of these this quarter.
Nice.
Does
that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. So, do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
You know what? Yeah, sure. I'll start. Let's start. Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. We had him on the podcast maybe a couple months ago, and we really enjoyed our conversation with him. We've enjoyed many of his resources and his books, and it was really fun to pull out Sacred Marriage once again and to read this. In addition to, I think, is it called Sacred Parenting? Is that, he's got the whole, like once once Sacred Marriage was a hit, it's like sold millions of copies. He really ran with that branding. So there's like Sacred Parenting, Sacred Singleness, Sacred Sex, and so I read a handful of them, and they're all so good. It was just kind of crazy because, we recently recorded that episode. It was our last episode. And I thought this was interesting that this was something that I had underlined in this book. And I bent the page even. When you're bending pages, I don't know if that's like a compliment to the author or not, because you're kind of destroying
big time compliment.
It's a compliment.
Big time, yeah.
But in regarding, your spouse's sins, but he says, let's see, what does he say? He goes, this manner of viewing marriage points to another important principle, not just having my sin exposed, but reflecting on how I treat my wife when her sin is exposed. Do I use this knowledge to crush her, humiliate her, or gain power over her? Or do I use it to gently and lovingly lead her into imitating the character of Jesus Christ? And that's so relevant to what I wish I had that quote pulled up.
I do too.
For the last episode.
So wait, you underlined this before we recorded that episode.
Yeah, because it stuck out to me. And then it goes, possessing the knowledge of someone's sin is powerful and a dangerous thing. On several occasions, men have pulled me aside and shared their frustration with their difficulty in forgiving their wives for having an affair. their natural tendency is to throw. I can just go on and on. Sorry, I was just continuing on there.
No, wait, this is like literally exactly what we talked about yesterday.
She didn't have an affair.
No. But the
Lording
using sin as a weapon against your spouse, even if it's in the past or whatever. We should
it was
put
one of the
that quote
pages
down below that episode because it's just so good.
Yeah,
so that people can read that book.
Yeah, so Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. Thoroughly enjoyed this one. Recommend this for Christian marriages.
Yeah, and I also really recommend that interview that we did with Gary Thomas.
Yeah, he had some great one-liners.
I really enjoyed it. I felt like it got richer and richer, actually, the more we got into it. Like the back half.
Yeah, the back third, I feel like.
Yeah.
You and I loved. We're like, oh, that was it. Keep going. This is good.
At least for like where we're at in marriage, that is where we were really like, oh, this is good. This is good. This is good.
I want to get better at that as somebody that's interviewing people too. And I'm sure the first part was great too, but it did feel a lot more kind of like, okay, I've read this. I've heard you say this before, which is not like, oh, I know everything that you're, obviously I'm still learning things from it. But in that back there is like, whoa, like, I haven't heard you talk about this, or I had never thought of this that way. And so anyways, because I think some of the people we have on are full of those things, right? But they kind of stick to what they assume you want to be talking about, which is a book you brought them on for, or a topic you brought them on for.
It's like you have to know what questions to ask.
Yes.
And we just kind of stumbled upon some great questions in terms of like his answers were great. I really appreciated those. Okay. Raising Boys to Men. So actually, we're going to have Durenda Wilson on the podcast later this summer, and it's going to be a real joy to talk to her more. But she wrote this book, Raising Boys to Men. I love the subtitle here, A Simple, Mercifully Short Book on Raising and Homeschooling Boys. And she raised and homeschooled 8 children, including 5 boys. So I do want to hear from women like that. And something that I really appreciated about this book was how many times she points to your husband's wisdom. I think so often when it comes to raising boy books, it's kind of focusing on the mom's relationship with the sons, which is super important, instead of being like, hey, yeah, you are the one intimately involved in your son's life on a day-to-day basis. If you're the one homeschooling them and home with them all day, these are the times you really need to pull your husband in, because some of our husbands are going to jump in and just lead in those areas. And sometimes we can over-facilitate as moms, thinking, oh, well, we'll take care of this. We'll have this conversation. We'll do this. Where she's like, this needs to be a man-to-man conversation. Just, you don't understand, so let your husband do the talking. And I thought that was really good, because that's something that Elisha has mentioned to me before.
You don't understand.
Not specifically to me like that, but when I bring something to him in a book about parenting sons or something, I'm like, this is so good. This is what this mom does. And he's like, okay, that is so far off and from a woman's perspective, and that's not going to resonate with a boy. And I mean, that makes sense. Right. That a man would just understand sons better. So she does have like phenomenal insight in this book on specifically a mother to son relationship and how boys work and how to motivate them and how to be in those situations where there is that tension there, where the boy wants to be a man and lead, but you're still his mother and he needs to respect you. And anyway, so I really love this book, and this will be a book that I am revisiting for sure.
Yeah. And actually, I think we're going to have her on the podcast too. Are we not?
Yes.
Oh, did I just give away a surprise there?
No, I mentioned that before I let in.
Oh, you did? Oh, man. I'm listening now.
Yeah. Okay. Wake up. No, that's good. You're probably thinking about your next book. Sometimes I do that. When Elisha's talking, I just start thinking about what I'm going to be talking about.
I'll get these 2 big guys out of the way here. So this is one of those examples that I was talking about where, I actually mentioned 100 million leads in our last book review video, because this was the book for the first book I heard about from Alex Hormozy, and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. I saw he creates a ton of content online, so I had seen a handful of his videos, and I got his book, and it was like page turner is not the right actual term for this, but it was riveting, but also it was the opposite of a page turner, because I'd get like halfway through a page and then have to close it and go implement what he was talking about, because it was so practical and so relevant to where we are at in our business, where I feel like I'm at as an entrepreneur. So I was like, no way. And then it's so funny because I ordered this, I loved it, and I looked at the top, it's like volume 2. It's like, volume 2? What's volume 1? Well, his first book was actually 100 million offers. And so I read these not in the right order. I started with 100 million leads, which is, I do recommend. That's not the one I read this quarter. I read $100 million offers. And I wish I would have started with this one, honestly. And we've both been digging into this one. Again, I know not all of our audience is interested in entrepreneurialism or running a business. But if you are, this is, again, it might just be one of those things where it's so timely to where we are currently at in our business. But it's one of those things where I'm like, man, I wish I would have read these 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I think that's how life works. Obviously, you have the knowledge you have, and you hopefully are seeking growth and seeking more knowledge, and then taking action with that current knowledge. But both of these books have really been really helpful to where we're at in our businesses. And again, early on in our business, it's like Tim Ferriss was a guy that we were reading and listening to, or Gary Vaynerchuk, and that was really helpful. But then I feel like this is just like that current business voice. And caveat, he's not Christians. His wife, who also does some of the content with him, is not a Christian. And so some of their, language is kind of colorful, meaning they swear, they use curse words, bad words. And I'll call them bad words. I'm going to call them bad words. But I think when they were talking about business, running business, starting a business, it's extremely helpful.
Yeah, and this is something that when you mentioned the $100 million leads book in our last book video, we did have some listeners who were like, hey, just watch out. The Hermosis, obviously, they don't know the Lord. They don't value the things, a biblical structure to really life. And that is something that you come in contact with a lot when you're viewing business.
Oh, sure.
Just because typically the people who are running something like $100 million company or something like that, or on their way there, have really had to make sacrifices that with our Christian value system we wouldn't make. And that's not to say that everybody does that,
right,
but it's a pretty popular thing to do because it's very difficult to achieve that kind of success without shedding certain things that are of value to, Elisha and I. So our pursuit is not a $100 million business.
Right.
We want to just do an excellent job in what we are doing. And so obviously you have to know that going in. It's like you just can't take everything. In fact, I will say this though, because I was going to mention this. They recommended a marriage book, and they do seem to have a very dynamic marriage, which I appreciate, in that they work together, really respect each other, really seem to love each other. And so I was like, okay, Elisha and I work together. This seems like a good book to read. I'm not even going to mention the title on here. So I ordered it, and it's the first book on marriage that I've read that wasn't from a Christian perspective at all. And I did end up throwing that out about 3 chapters in. And it's funny because I didn't realize how off marriage advice could be. Like in a marriage book saying oh, well, in your marriage, if you're having a hard time in your marriage, go flirt with other people or have relationships with other people, and that will make your relationship more interesting. Oh. And I was literally going okay, this is not the book for us. Or anybody who wants a marriage with longevity and true intimacy.
Right,
honestly.
which is why we're not, that's why we don't go to these people for marriage counsel or for child training or for anything like that. But I think they're helpful in this vein. And that is, again, a bunch of caveats, and we've probably mentioned numerous books. I think this is very popular in the health space, right? When you think of, boy, I really want to improve my health, some of the, most prominent thinkers or writers in that space, whether it's Dr. Peter Attia or Dr. Andrew Huberman, or, even not a doctor, but Wim Hof, right? These guys that are just these health fanatics. There are so many great things to take from their work, but you don't go to those guys for marriage advice. You certainly don't go to them for family advice. And so as long as you, I think, have that in your brain, you've got your convictions, you're able to then take the wisdom that they have gained through obsessing about a particular subject and then apply it to your life in a Christian manner, I think.
Yeah. But I do think it also is very easy to get swept along with taking even business advice, and you forget oh, they don't have any kids. Or like, oh, like that's not a part of their value system. Or, so you start to structure your business in such a way. Because I think I knew that, but I still kind of got taken in with this like, Elisha and I can run this business and he could be the marketing and I can do the operations, and then it's like, take a step back and it's like, we have 5 kids. Like that is my main priority over here. We need to hire someone for the operations role. That is not going to be me in the long term. And so, it can be easy to get sucked into like, kind of copy and pasting everything, thinking, oh, this will be successful for us. This will be fun for us. And then being like, okay, that's not what we want in 10 years.
Well, that's again, going to like even your dad's giant 5. It is really helpful to have a working filter when you are making decisions in life. And when you're going to a business book, like business or provision, financial provision, effectiveness in the marketplace is down below our marriage, right? It's lower on the priority list. It's lower than parenting your children. It's lower than, I'd say even being effective in our community when it comes to like relationships and community and ministry. And I'd say it's even below our health. And so you have to be clear on that when you're hearing their illustrations, when they're sharing their examples, and you can't just copy and paste, be like, I'm going to do it just like them. You have to find the principle in it and then apply it to your life in a way that fits that filter. And that's again with health, with finance, with many things. But I'm with you. It's easy to get swept up and you're like, this is the only thing that matters. And so
above it per se, you know what I mean? So it's like anytime
totally
we're hearing from a secular voice, we have to really have someone to bounce ideas off of or something where it's just like, hey, this is a secular voice. We've got to be wary and not be like, oh, I'm not affected by being around all these secular voices, because I've seen over and over again, it's easier to point out in other people's lives, right? People get very affected and not think that they are. And it's been the same thing in our experience at different times.
I think that, at different times when I've listened to like Jocko's podcast, Jocko Willink, or like Cam Haynes, who are, like they're very manly men, and there's a bunch to be inspired by from their life. But then I'll hear stories where, like, I remember so vividly hearing like Jocko being like, like this was hard on my family, but like I'd get home from work at, 7:30 I'd get home from work at 6 or something, 6:30. And this really killed my wife. But, I'd take my uniform off, grab my gi, head to jujitsu. And I went and it'd be 2.5 hours of jujitsu, an hour of class and an hour and a half of rolling and be back. But I needed that. And she soon came to find out that I needed that. I was like, oh man, like in that world, I'm like, I need to train a lot more jiu-jitsu. Like, what am I doing? But then I step back, I'm like, whoa, Jocko's priorities and my priorities are very different, right? And I remember the same thing with Cam Haynes saying the same thing, where he's like, no, my wife just knew that like I needed to go to the woods, like I'd be working all week, but I needed to spend my time, in the woods on the weekend. And it was a sacrifice. I'm like, whoa, I'm not going to make that sacrifice. And so being clear on but like you said, we're never above getting sucked into different obsessive people, especially when they're excellent, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of appeal there too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's typically like something you enjoy or like interests you, right? That's why you listen to these people, or that's why you read the books, is because you already have an interest there. So it's easy to get swept away by the interest.
Yes.
And it kind of confirms. The funny thing about when you're obsessive about an interest that you have is that when you see someone really hardcore in it, you think, oh, this confirms I need to work harder in this area. But the work in itself is very addicting.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Or like going into the woods and like, I don't know, living on nothing but like cockroaches.
He was hunting. Yeah.
Or whatever. Hunting.
Yeah, bow hunting.
Is like very addicting when you have that desire. So it sounds hardcore, like to work out for 2.5 hours.
Right, but it's very self-serving.
But it's also self-serving, so it's like, it sounds hardcore to build $100 million business,
right,
but it's very self-serving, so we want the hardcore to actually be.
Yeah, well, it's like we want to be excellent in our marriage. We want to be excellent in our home.
According to God's standard.
Amen.
So, okay, I talked a lot on that book.
We love live music in our home. I think you would love live music in your home if you don't already enjoy it in your home. And that's why we made Voperg Music Academy. Check out the coupon below and you get a special discount for being a listener of this podcast. And you can bring live music into your home. Piano, guitar, fiddle, mandolin, ukulele. If any of those instruments sound like fun to you to learn or to have your children learn, go check it out.
but I'm going to jump into this one. The Mysterious Affair at Styles. So Elisha and I watched an Agatha Christie, a really old version of one. I don't know if they have modern ones.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Actually, a while ago,
I think,
or a few weeks ago, actually,
Yes.
not very long ago.
Yes.
And I immediately was like, what? Agatha Christie's a writer, like a murder mystery writer, but it was like also retro and fun and like not creepy, because I'm not like into, like horrific murder mystery stuff.
Did you only know her as like a novelist? That
I didn't know her as anything.
Oh, got it.
And then when I was watching the movie and in the credits it said it was like based off an Agatha Christie novel, it reminded me that I have seen that author in your parents' house, Agatha Christie.
Oh,
and I had no clue. And I was like, oh, she writes books. So anyways, I got The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And the quote on the back, I love these editions, by the way. I have quite a few of them, these painted editions. They're just beautiful. Every murderer is probably somebody's old friend. And this was very twisty. And I was the classic, like, this person did it. Oh no, this person did it. This person. Like basically whoever the author wanted me to think did the murder, I was fully on board and pretty much thought everyone committed it and no one committed it. So I wouldn't be a very good detective. But this was really fun. I hadn't read a novel in a long time, and it was just, it was a really good, fun read, but I felt kind of classy because the edition was classy.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're adding more of that, those additions to our library, because they do look good.
Yeah, they're pretty.
Which is nice. That was fun. That it is. I'm grateful that you and I have gotten, I think, better at knowing where each other are in life. Like you're like, oh man, because you and I love being in very productive seasons where we're to bed at 8:30, lights out, up very early, working. And we've been in a season where you're like, man, we weren't feeling any of those things. And you're like, I'm going to get this book. I'm like, that's a great idea. And I got some fiction as well. And it was really fun to, like, even though, it's like we have this rule of not having, we don't have smartphones, but like not having phones in bed and like not having our own screens in bed. But I will say, again, this is just my, subjective, I guess, opinion here. Like when you're both reading a different fiction book in bed, it's different, right? Like it's totally different, because you're able to be like, oh, listen to this. This is crazy. Yeah. You should share it. I just wanted to be different.
It is different. It's a different effect on the brain. It's not destroying my gray matter.
Okay,
I will say, too, it's like we've been in a season where I've been wanting to read fiction. And it's like rare I want to read fiction.
That's what I mean.
Because I get so sucked into fiction. It's like difficult for me to sometimes enjoy it without becoming obsessive over it.
Yes. And that is the nice thing about, having a few years now under our belt in marriage, is you start to realize, not that I would ever criticize you for reading fiction, because I obviously love fiction as well. But to know that, like, oh, that's a season they're in where it's like life's happening fast. You want something at the end of the day to kind of like get your mind off of the craziness of your current life, right? And I think I've been in different seasons. I've been in a season, like that, and I feel like there's mutual understanding here.
Well, I think fiction is good. Like I just read it before bed, though.
Yes.
In this, I don't read fiction during the day.
Same.
Like that's unhealthy for me. Straight up unhealthy. So for me, it's like something before bed. And it's funny, like we don't eat after bed anymore, and we don't watch things very often before bed anymore. So the book is like a fun treat.
Well, speaking of fiction, I'll share a couple of the books that I read this last quarter. So at book club, we read The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas. We all enjoyed it so much that we nominated the next book to be 20 Years After by Alexander Dumas, which is continuing the same story. I didn't even know this book existed, honestly.
I didn't either.
Obviously, I knew about Three Musketeers, and I had heard of The Iron Mask, though I had never read that one. But 20 Years After was written between those two, and it is, continuing the same story. The same main characters are in the book, and it's funny. I've mentioned before that The Count of Monte Cristo is probably my all-time favorite fiction book. It's up there for you as well, right?
Top three for
Top three. And I'd say a half of the way through Three Musketeers, I was like, oh man, this is no Count of Monte Cristo, right? Like I still was very biased towards Count of Monte Cristo. And then by the end, I was like, oh, that was a great book. And then, when we started 20 years after, it happened because I was already in the world that he had created and I was familiar with the characters. I instantly fell in love with it. And I mean, it's hard to say like which one is in my top 3 now of all time, but I want to say like the Three Musketeers, and I'm excited. I'm going to read all of them, whether or not we choose them for book club. So I'll probably read the Iron Mask next, but then he also wrote some other books after he wrote those 3 that are like 1.5 type books, right? Like following some of the different characters after the original book. And so I'm really excited to I think there's like 6 or 7 books. I want to read all of them because I've really fallen in love with these characters. And honestly, I've found a new appreciation for Alexander Dumas. Like I said, I loved The Count of Monte Cristo. I read that one twice, which is a big deal for me because I'm a slow reader and that's a pretty long book.
That's a thick book, yeah.
But to me, he's really fun because it's so action and adventure, right? So you have a lot of that, like, that low hanging fruit where you're like, it just has a guy, it's fun, and there's fighting, and there's, mystery and mystique, and there's adventure. But then there's also, in my mind, total depth and layers to it. And then in addition to that, just beautiful writing, right? So I think he does a great job of when it's the banter between characters, keeping that short and quippy and really punchy. But then when he goes, when the commentary comes in, it's like very flowery. I feel, at least to me, and like, I don't know, like good writing, I don't know of what type of writing, but it's kind of like, oh, like that felt like a good sentence, or that paragraph seemed like it was a good paragraph. And so the combination of all those things has really made it enjoyable, where it's got that element of being a page turner, but then it's also thought provoking. There's again, it's all set in, there's historical accuracy to some of it, right? As far as the characters and the time and place and the various events. So you feel like you're learning some about history. But then just the writing style. And again, these are translations, obviously, from the original. And I've enjoyed these translations. It's just fun to read. And so anyways, huge fan right now. I literally have like 4 chapters left of 20 years after, but I love it. Like I don't know if you guys can relate to like when you're getting to the end of a book that you really enjoy, you kind of start slowing down. We're like, I really want to savor this. I love this so much. That's where I'm at right now with 20 years after. Anyways, I'm kind of getting emotional thinking about ending this book, honestly. I'm joking.
Well, the funny thing is so I haven't read 20 Years After, and I read The Three Musketeers, and I was pretty disenchanted by The Three Musketeers because they aren't really admirable characters in the book, in The Three Musketeers. But you said that 20 Years After is very redemptive. They're a lot more mature and no?
Some of them for sure. Like some of them, I think, are a lot more admirable. Because we were relating on this after you finished The Three Musketeers. We're like, this is not a book we're going to encourage our kids to read. In general, I think they're a lot more admirable in the 20 years. I mean, they're all 20 years older. And so, yeah, I'd say a couple. Again, I'm not at the end here, but Athos for sure. D'Artagnan, is that how you say his name? D'Artagnan. I would say by the middle / second half of the book, I don't admire him at all at the first half, maybe the first third of 20 Years After. I'm like, dude, what have you been doing with your life? But then Aramis is kind of the same as far as like his womanizing and just that whole thing. He's just doing it now 20 years later in his way. And I would say Porthos is more lovable, but still the same guy. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think when we were talking about just the Three Musketeers, it sounds like it really lays the foundation for 20 Years After.
Yes.
And that's where it gets really twisty and the plot gets really interesting. Because when we talked about the Three Musketeers, it was like really the Milady is the smartest one. She's kind of the hero. She's the anti-hero of the Three Musketeers.
This got me big time ridiculed at book club because...
But you were right.
Because I finished up like last minute, like 20 minutes before we were meeting. I was in my car finishing this thing up. So I didn't have a ton of time to really like consider the whole book. But I went into book club thinking like, man, Milady's like... honestly, she kind of crushed that whole time. And I felt like the Musketeers were always a step behind. You know, there was all 4 of them.
They were just kind of bumbling around with their valets.
That's
it
what I
ends
felt like.
for like forever.
And then even by the end, it's like, wow, I didn't feel like they said they went through all the steps of justice to have like an actual trial. I'm like, man, like they went and found an executioner, and I guess it was like it so happened that he had beef with her too, and apparently they didn't know that. That kind of bugged me a little bit.
Well,
anyway,
the whole
so
thing wasn't fair. Like, Milady was unjustly charged for most of that book.
Well,
Even
they
her
didn't
crime
charge
of
her
originally getting branded was kind of a joke.
Yeah, I think like there towards the end when they shared more about her background, you're kind of like, whoa, like that was a tough. Again, I'm like totally. We talk about how like we don't want to give let people's past dictate whether or not they're guilty, you know, in the present. But I'm not gonna lie, when I heard a little bit about her past and they didn't go a ton into it, I was like, oh boy, that's like it kind of makes sense that she got to that place of having the brand, and then she's having to live from that place of having the brand, right?
Like
Like
her
at that
first
point,
husband or her second husband or whatever tries to kill her because of the brand. Like, that's messed up.
and if they would have said, because the what's the guy, the Duke, because she was De Winters, right?
Oh, yeah, De Winters,
De
yeah.
Winters. She was married to his brother, and they kept alluding to like they thought that she might have killed her brother, and you're supposed to really think like, oh, she definitely murdered him, but they never say whether or not she did. You're just, and again, I think they actually, well, yeah, they never, I don't think they ever say that, but you're supposed to be like, yeah, for sure they did, but they don't give you that actual evidence in the Three Musketeers. But then she does straight up kill the girl that D'Artagnan likes. I forget her name.
Yeah, but he killed her, the guy she liked. So, right? It was like such a tit for tat situation where they acted like he was all justice for justice and she was totally wrong by doing the same thing.
Yeah, I will say this.
And he was just
at the end
jealous
of-
because she didn't like him.
Like I said, at the end of Three Musketeers, I didn't have this like, oh my goodness, justice and goodness triumphed. It was like I felt a little bit more like there were these kind of bumbling guys, and like you said,
Yeah.
you know, tripping around with their valets, and they all had, in the name of, you know, defending the queen or whatever, you know, like Milady
Honor.
was a bad person. Okay, so she was a criminal, but it's not like I had so much admiration for how the Musketeers went about, you know, defeating her. Anyways, that's how I felt about it at the end.
And it just seemed like D'Artagnan was like, he's the one who liked her, right?
Yeah,
He was
exactly.
Just
Like he had this
jealous
crush.
and embarrassed and
I felt like that happened
offended.
too.
Like he
Yes.
was just this shamed man
Yeah.
who thought like, oh, she's gonna love me so much more than that guy, and she didn't. And so he's like, oh, I hate you. Like,
Yeah, he didn't come to
It
like
was
he
like
didn't start
his
his
hurt.
scheme against her from this place of righteousness or of like the greater
No.
good. He felt kind of like jaded, I think, a little bit. He was
Yeah.
like, what? And then
he's like miffed, like his pride was hurt,
Yeah.
and so he decides to take her out. Anyways, so that said, when we were talking about the Three Musketeers, I was really shocked when they were going into the 20 years after.
Yeah.
And then you've loved the 20 years after.
Yes.
I feel like I need to give the 20 years after a
Well-
go because it sounds pretty twisty and more intriguing.
And
than
again,
the first
yeah,
one.
I don't want to give away crazy plot, you know, or what is it called? Spoilers. Yeah. But it makes me want to go back and read the Three Musketeers because I'm like, okay, wait a second.
Was I missing something?
Yeah, was I? And so
And that's the fun
But-
thing. Usually with Dumas is he is so good at weaving things together. We're
Oh,
like,
yes.
no way I can go back and I can get more out of
Right.
that. And I didn't feel that way when I read the Three Musketeers. Like it was pretty slow and dry for me. So
I
anyways.
felt way more of that, like Count of Monte Cristo. What plot twist? Like, no way. That was that person. I felt that way more and experienced that way more in 20 years after. And so it makes me want to go, like you said.
Yeah.
When I finished Count of Monte Cristo, all I did was want to read it again. Because you're like, wait a second, he was that guy. Wait, I want to go back and hear that conversation
It
again.
didn't help. Like 5 of the main characters have M names. And so I wanted to go back and read it again just because I realized I had some of the characters mixed
Yeah.
up.
Oh, well, that's the most embarrassing thing for me, being at book club and like kind of like mumbling, trying to talk about the characters and mumbling their name. All these French names that I am nowhere close to
But then it's nice because you come home and then you start pronouncing them the right way, and then I get to change my pronunciation.
Yeah, I like come back and correct you. Like I'm like, what?
Yeah, which I appreciate.
It's not D'Artagnan. It's just D'Artagnan. Yeah.
I think I called him D'Artagon or something. Yeah. Isn't that how it's spelled?
D'Artagnan.
I think there's a G.
There is a G. Yin Yan. Yeah.
I think it was like D'Artagon.
Yeah.
And anyways, yeah, I really mess up names. Okay. The Woman at the Wheel. So this was a date night. Elisha and I, we went to a bookstore. We got a book. Elisha mentioned it in our Top 5 Tuesday. And this sounded really fun because it was about the wife of Carl Benz, of like Mercedes-Benz. And she invested her inheritance and her dowry into his company to keep it from failing before they were even married. And so I was like, that sounds like such a fun read. You know it's going to be seeped in feminism. But I still was like, this is based on a true story. I'm going to give it a go. And the first half was so thick with feminism, you know, put in there by the author, that I was just like, gag me with a fork. Like, I don't think I can get through this because it's so dramified and like, just let her live her life. But then I really felt like as it got more into the story, it was just so cool to see how this gal worked with her husband in the factory and just totally believed in him and did everything she could to help him succeed. And really, you know, he was the classic, like, crazy inventor who had a hard time keeping business afloat and stuff like that. She started doing negotiations for him. And they were just like such a team, but she never spoke poorly about his weaknesses, I guess. Other people would outside, and she'd always just defend him, even though she was aware that, like, yeah, he doesn't like do everything perfect, but she really admired his genius. So I don't know. I just thought it was really cool. There is this moment in here where she does this crazy ride where she like sneaks out with her 2 sons in the middle of the night and steals the car. And obviously it was like bad marriage decision. And I was just like stressed out. Like, how is this going to end? You know, it's not going to end well. I really related to parts in their marriage where like it's super tense and you're trying to find unity, but like, what do, you know? And so I don't know. It was really fun. And obviously, like, I thought the author nailed it in the middle until the last paragraph again is like some guy comes up to her and was like, you just inspired me. You're not only a woman, you're awesome. And like this whole monologue that's just like, that did not happen, you know, but yeah, it was inspirational.
She had to put it in there. She's like, we need more.
Like so forced at the end there, you know, it's just like, okay, great. Like her story is cool enough without you having to like virtue signal or something about women. Like she was clearly an equal with her husband, and they were cool. They had a great marriage. So anyways, it was fun. If you can, you know, stomach the feminism in it, I was really like, this was a page turner for me.
That's fun. Yeah, that was fun when you would share different parts about that story. And then obviously, because it's a, you know, current company, it is always interesting to hear origin stories to current companies or even, you know, current prominent families. So yeah, I loved hearing about it, I guess, as you read this one.
Yeah, it made me want to read Carl Benz's autobiography. And it was cute seeing the things that he wrote about his wife in there, like little clips and stuff. So it was inspirational that way.
That is great. Okay, so this is one, Switch on Your Brain by Dr. Caroline Leaf, that has been kind of a staple, I feel like, in your home. You know, like your dad's referenced this book countless times. You've read it and been a fan of this book. But for whatever reason, I don't know why this is how it works. When a book is overhyped, you know, and like your wife's the one that talks a lot about it, it's like, the last thing I'm going to do is read that one next, right?
I can't even remember what's in that book. I've seen it a million times, and everything you've told me about it has been new.
Well, that's what's so funny is that I think, because I felt like do you ever feel like you've read a book even though you've never read it just because you've heard so much about it? Like you're like, oh, I listened to a podcast with the author, so clearly I know what's in the book, but it's not the same thing, right? Obviously. And I think that's where I was with this book, where it's like everybody was reading it in your family and in our circle and talking about it. And I was like, well, I don't need to read it. Like, I'll read something else. And this was going on like 4 and 5 years ago, is what I'm saying. Okay, so I think this was, at least that's when I remember it happening.
Yeah, it seems to have been around for a long time.
Yeah. And then it wasn't until like a month ago that I was like, you know what? I don't think I've actually ever read that book, Switch on Your Brain. And I can't say that I finished it, but I am really glad that I'm reading it, because go figure, listening to a podcast about a book is not the same as reading the book. And this is a line that I underlined here. She says here, so really quick, so she's a Christian, and but she is also, I think, a neuroscientist or doctor or surgeon, some sort of, well, she's a doctor, because it says Dr. Caroline Leaf. I don't know what type, okay, so she works in the area of cognitive neuroscience, or she's worked in that area, whatever. And her pioneering work on neuroplasticity, so that's like her thing. She talks about neuroplasticity. But she's a Christian, and so she takes these verses like, be not conformed to this world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, or set your mind on things above, and how we really do get to recreate our brain. Like this is where your dad talks about like forming those new brain patterns. It's a physical thing that's happening to your brain when you choose to think a thought. Whether you're proactively thinking a thought or you're passively thinking a thought, it's having a physical effect on your brain. And some things that she's highlighted with like a ton of science backing it, at least seems like pretty sciencey. She says, herein lies the key. The sins of parents create a predisposition, not a destiny. You are not responsible for something you are predisposed. Thank you.
It's probably trickier to read than it is to just say from memory.
Yes. You are not responsible for something you are predisposed to because of ancestral decisions. You are responsible, however, to be aware of predispositions, evaluate them, and choose to eliminate them. And even just so that's like a pretty common sentiment throughout the book, where it's like, oh, no doubt, like what your, great whoever, grandma or grandpa or whoever, whatever they ate or however they, were raised in their environment, what they did, that does affect you. It affects your DNA right now. You're born into this state with some predispositions to certain things, but you're not a victim. It's not the same as destiny. And I think that's really helpful. It's similar to that whole, that dirty genes. You can actually rewrite your genes, which nobody ever talks about. It's like, this is just the hand I've been dealt. I'm going to live with these genes. But not only can you rewrite your genes, you really actually have a ton of influence on your children and your grandchildren and your great grandchildren's genes. And so it just puts a lot of, I guess, it's kind of, empowering, for, I don't know, lack of a better term, where you're kind of like, oh, got it. Yes, because of my, again, great grandparents, maybe bad decisions I might have, or my parents' bad decisions, I might have this predisposition to something. I need to be aware of that. Got it. Now it's my responsibility to make choices that free me from that predisposition and not become a victim to it. So anyways, that's really her sentiment in a lot of this book, with way more science than I probably even care to know about. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, what you've mentioned in that book has made me want to read it, because I think I picked it up when I was 20 and didn't really care. You know what I mean? It was just kind of like everyone was reading it. I can't remember for the life of me. I think I remember hearing our brain is plastic, I guess, and then it can be changed. Mm-hmm. And brain grooves, all about brain grooves, really stuck out to me. Form new ones. But everything you've been mentioning, I'm like, oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm. Katie, what do you have next?
Okay, so Daniel Boone. I couldn't remember if we'd mentioned this before, because I read this with the kids. We finished it April 9th, so just recently. But it's the weirdest copy of it. It's this giant book. And I actually got it because my 7-year-old could read it on his own. So the copy is it's big writing and stuff like that. So the first part of the book is his own story. So Daniel Boone writes out his story kind of quickly, and then Francis Lister Hawkes writes out a little bit more in-depth version. And I learned so much about the state of Kentucky. The kids and I read this right before going back to visit our brother-in-law and my sister back in Kentucky, where we were able to actually visit Boonesboro, which is mentioned here. And it's just so impressive how people settle untamed lands. It really makes you think, wow, I have it so easy. But this was just, I don't know, it made history come alive. It made Kentucky come alive, and the Indian Wars and the Civil War and how all that was going on all kind of around the same time. I didn't realize that the Indian Wars were going on at the same time, and the British were using the hatred between the settlers and the Indians to kind of stir up conflict with the settlements. And
Yeah, they were kind of equipping them, giving them arms. Right?
yeah, they were equipping them, and it's just a really cool story of bravery and from a true perspective. And I just want our kids to have stories of true heroes. And going back to this stuck out to me so much. Indy Wilson said it, and I mention this all the time, but it's like survival is not the goal. And you see that these people had such a big purpose, going even to, is it Gary Thomas, and his concept, don't worry about falling out of love, worry about falling out of purpose. It's like these people just had purpose. They had purpose in their marriages, purpose in their families, and in their lives. And here in America, it's so easy to just not to lack purpose and to think survival is the goal. And even more than survival, it's comfort, And so just to see what humans are capable of is just super inspirational. So the kids and I just love this book. Kentucky used to be called the Dark and Bloody Ground. And so the kids actually just refer to it every time I say Kentucky, they just say, oh, the Dark and Bloody Ground.
Nice.
Yeah, that's dramatic. But it was really fun, and it made me excited to read more history. This is like the epitome of a Charlotte Mason book, I guess, in that it's living, and you're learning geography and you're learning history and so many different things at one time, but in a story that was really well written. So,
yeah, that one was a fun one. I wish I could have heard more of that story, because I think you were reading it at meal times, and so I'd be in and out, and I'd hear different parts of it, and then the kids would talk about it at different times. But it really was fun being able, and boy, do we want to do that. If we ever have the opportunity to do, more traveling, if we can read a book or two about the area, a book about the history of it, or a character, a person that grew up in that area, it makes it come to life. Because just the kids were so engaged when we visited Boonesboro in a way that I really don't think they would have been had we not read this book.
I mean, I was like,
yeah, you were captivated.
I was enthralled.
You were. Okay, so once again, these are a bunch of books I pulled out, and this is funny. I'm just now realizing it. So the book that I read this quarter from Douglas Wilson was The Federal Husband. So we interviewed Douglas Wilson a couple months back, I believe, and absolutely loved that interview. It was just a highlight for both you and I. And so I think Reforming Marriage was maybe the first book you read. I read Future Men a long time ago, and it's so funny. I read it before I was married, before obviously I had children, and I don't even remember what I thought of it. And then I read it again as a father and as a husband. I was like, oh my goodness, this is so good. Then I read The Covenant Household. Loved all of those. Recommend all of them. And then I read The Federal Husband this last quarter, kind of in preparation of our interview with Douglas Wilson. And I know, I feel like this is a classic, whichever is the most recent one's your favorite. But I feel like The Federal Husband right now, I don't even have the copy because I'm bringing it with me everywhere I go because I'm kind of still working through it. It's been my favorite thus far. And I guess the way that it really does, I don't know, highlight the role and responsibility of being a husband. And it is interesting. You and I have talked about this. It is funny because even a book like this, I had heard chattering about it, some chatter about it. And then you read it and you're kind of like, what are people I won't get into it. I think people should read it because I think that there's so much of, again, judging a book by its cover, so to speak, or just judging a book by hearsay or somebody else's review. And a book is so much more than a book review. It's so much more than the inside, whatever you call that, the sleeve, the inside sleeve or a quick snippet about it. And I think being able to really hear a thorough thought process through is you can't, it's the whole, you can't knock it until you try it. You can't judge a book by its cover. And I've been so guilty of reading 2/3 of a book, thinking that it's not that great, saying that. And then I go back later and I finish it. I'm like, Oh, got it. Okay. Like they actually wrapped that up pretty well. And that's how I felt about all of these. I'm just kind of like, this is so good. I recommend this to anyone and everyone. And I think any Christian that reads this will be blessed by it.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the Bible sometimes when I hear people's book reviews, because you can take, and I mean, we're guilty of this too, but you could take a sentence, right, and then just take it totally out of context. And then when you read that sentence in context of the book, it's like, oh, that makes so much sense. And you get the author intent behind that, where someone maybe took that totally wrong because of their past or their experience or whatever, their predisposition against the book or something like that. And the same thing with like scripture.
Yes. And you're
could
so
really
right.
do that if you'd like.
You can, yeah.
Okay, so this was another fiction one, The Secret Garden, another beautiful painted edition, which I just love. On the back, I love these little quotes. I am sure there is magic in everything. And the kids are just delighted to read this. And I think it's because I'm the one reading all the Yorkshire in it. I remember reading this as a kid and like 10 or 11 years old and being like, this is so hard to read. Why can't they just write normal English? Like everything is like, no, you know?
That is hard.
It's tricky.
And I can't put my finger on how authors do it well. And then some people make it so hard to read. I'm like, I get what you're doing here. But boy, is there a way to make this a little bit more readable? You know?
Well, some people, they do like a little twang. And then some people, they write like, I think so true to it where it's like, this is like another language.
Right.
But it's just delightful. And we are so excited to be finishing up this book. I didn't know if it would capture the kids' interest because it is pretty slow. And I tell you what, I am just overjoyed by how slow book gets us all just really excited. So.
That is kind of cool. Yeah. So I'll finish up on mine over here. So once again, I actually didn't even finish. Here I am. I'm going to bash this book and I haven't even finished it. What a hypocrite. But I'm going for it. Okay. And so on the same free day, I think or the same date, maybe is what it was. It was a date read that you got that. Whatever. I can't remember what the order was, but I bought the Old Man in the Sea at a bookstore when Katie and I were there. It's real short. I hadn't read any of Ernest Hemingway's books, and this is like basically a short story. I mean, it's very short. Like it's 126 pages, and I loved it. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And it's a very simple story, but within the simple story, there's a ton of deep thoughts, and deep concepts. And it's the characters are very endearing, I think, to me. Even though it's a short story, I'm very attached to the few characters in the story by the end. And it was just a great experience reading it. So I was like, no way. So I went back to that same bookstore.
I'm going to take this, actually. I need to read this.
Yeah. I was like, okay, what's the other Ernest Hemingway book they have here? And I got The Sun Also Rises. And again, like this one is as enjoyable as that one was. This one has been like that much more painful, honestly, to read. And again, I haven't finished it. Okay. So, I'll take that into consideration, but as like, sweet and thoughtful of a writer, he felt like in The Sun Also Rises, where you like were drawn in to this, the life of this old man and the
Old Man in the Sea.
The Old Man in the Sea. Yeah. And the boy there, with this one, it's so choppy. And again, I've read some fiction with like that punchy, choppy, quippy, like short sentence style that I've really enjoyed. And I don't know. I feel like Kurt Vonnegut's very much that way, and I've enjoyed some of his books. And I know Ernest Hemingway, I think, is even considered one of the early. I think he's considered one of like the early users of that style, like that short, choppy, smaller sentence style. But maybe it's because I've been in the midst of Alexander Dumas, who I feel like uses short, choppy sentences in such an effective way, but then has them sandwiched between these like long, elegant sentences, where this one has just been so exhausting and so like not getting to the point, not to mention the story. It's just really not inspirational at all. So anyways, yeah, that's my take on it, even though I haven't finished it. And honestly, I don't know if I will. Like, I'll keep it in keep it over here on my bookshelf. And if someday I'm like, you know what, I'm going to read the last, 100 pages, I might do that. But
Like, is it so depressing? Is like the story lame? Like, is it something?
no,
like
so it's about
you wouldn't want
it's
the
about a
kids to read,
handful
or-
of it's about a I mean there is like promiscuity like one of the main characters is a promiscuous woman, but it's all alluded to, right? Like it's a part of her character. There's no like sex scenes in the book. But the characters, they're a bunch of expats that have moved to, Paris, and they're living this supposedly, fast paced, heavy drinking life in response to their experiences, in the war. And they're supposed to be these deep thinkers that like care so much about life. And I think the reason it's even more discouraging is that people say this is based off of like his personal life, Ernest Hemingway. And you're like, dude, this is so, I don't know. Maybe I know myself and I know I'm not a very like deep and clever guy. So whenever I see people living a very like simple and carnal and sinful and fleshly life, and people like try to put meaning and depth to it, they're like, oh, but see, they're struggling with this. And it's this, like, it's so, what's the word, where it's like, it's more than what it looks like, like there's all this meaning behind it. I'm like, no, I can't buy into that. Like, again, I'm basing it off of myself. And I know I'm not that complicated of a person. It's like,
No,
when
you
I'm
are
doing
a deep
stupid
thinker.
things, it's because I'm being a stupid guy. You know what I mean? And when I don't know. And so
It's the classic like romanticized poet
yes.
that
Well, and that's who
kills
these all are.
themselves
Like,
in the end.
Exactly.
Like that is just the classic
and that's who
artist.
that's who the characters are, right? It's authors, it's journalists, it's artists.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, I can't do this right now. Like this is not they're and I'm a guy that does like to think I enjoy the deeper things in life, or think there's more to it. But this is done in such a hedonistic way. And really like a nihilistic way. It's very nihilistic, and it's like, I can't do this. So,
Well, we should probably just throw it out.
yeah, let's
There's
throw it
these
out.
books where it's like, if it's not an A player, it doesn't deserve a spot
Yeah,
on
and that's
our
why I
bookshelf.
bought. I bought
you
the
know?
paperback. It's like, easy to throw away.
And we're also getting to this stage in our kids' lives where we have some readers that are pretty prolific.
Yes.
And I'm starting to realize that. Like, I want stuff. Like, if they pick up a book on our bookshelf, it's going to be like, this is endorsed by Daddy and Mommy, and it's fantastic. And that doesn't mean to say they won't be like, when they're in high school or something, like, oh, you read that book or whatever, you know what I mean? But it's not like I want books that, even like Kurt Vonnegut or whatever. There's certain books I don't love on our bookshelf.
Yes.
With, middle school, and high school
Definitely.
readers. You know
Right.
what I mean? Where it's
Right.
just kind of like, just want it to be I don't want it to feel like the library.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? When they
Like,
go to the library, they can deal with that.
No
I
doubt.
don't want that to be our home library.
I agree.
So I don't know. There's some books that I'll probably get rid of too. Okay. This one, I forget who recommended this book. It's called 50 Ways to Wow Your Husband. I wonder if my mom recommended it.
Oh, I thought it. 52 ways.
What did I say?
You said 50 ways. Did you throw two of those? Just throw two of them out? And you're like, well, two of them were no good.
Terrible idea. And I'll be honest, I got this book a couple weeks ago, and I feel like I ordered this months ago because I do not remember ordering this book. And it showed up, and I was like, who recommended that and what? But I mean, it looks good. And this gal is a Christian, has phenomenal marriage advice from my perspective. And sadly, I have not used one of these ways to wow Elisha.
Well, I've been wowed, I feel like, as of late.
Oh, thank you.
And so you probably are using them and you don't even know it.
No, there's probably, like, if I'm in a lazy season, there's probably a few tried and true ways to wow your spouse that they like or whatever. But she has fantastic ideas in this book, and I am excited to use them in a little different season of life when I have a little more bandwidth. But I would highly recommend it. I think it's fantastic way to pursue your husband and keep loving him.
Man, so how do we get you more bandwidth? That's the question, Katie.
They are not what you think.
That's all I had there.
That's good. I was going to mention this one.
Oh, go for it.
I don't think I need to. This has been long enough.
Well, no. Okay, we'll save it. You want to save it? You just want to
Okay, maybe I'll just go through it.
go through it really quick.
Okay,
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
really fast. Elisha bought this for me on a date night as well. Half-Baked Harvest every day. It's a beautiful cookbook. And if anything, if nothing more than like the photos are incredibly inspirational. And so what I've started using this for actually is just kind of like looking at something like this, like, oh, herb sun-dried tomato salad with chickpeas. That sounds amazing. And then I will actually Google search a recipe with those ingredients where I can see how many stars the recipes have, because I didn't realize that I really rely on ratings and reviews. And here in a recipe book, this can be really inspirational, but I haven't found all the recipes to actually be as good as the pictures. And so I've adapted every recipe I've made in here that I have liked, and a few of them just were kind of big misses, you know? So I do recommend it. It's beautiful. It's fun to read through. Like the mozzarella sticks.
Those really win.
I will
say, like,
no, but like I looked online for a different mozzarella
that's what I was
stick.
going to say, is that I feel like some of the recipes you've followed, you know, line by line, have been like, okay, like would have thought that.
Yeah, kind of a
that
bummer.
Would have been better. But this has inspired you to really get creative and try some new things. And when you've used your own brain and like and not just follow these lines.
Yeah, like not my brain, but like Google's more.
Oh, sure. But that's using your brain. Kind of like, wait a second, I want this person's opinion. What do they think about it? And then you look it up. It's like, I don't know.
Exactly.
You always use your own brain.
It spawned a lot of fun new recipes. We've
Yes.
eaten a ton of new recipes the last week. And some of them have been
Oh.
big ones. Like,
I wrote about that in Top 5 Tuesday recently.
yeah.
Like
the
lunch, dinner,
bourbon
lunch, dinner.
sauce on the steak was like phenomenal.
That caprese salad.
Was
Oh,
so good.
so
and so
good.
those are things that, like, I'll actually link those two recipes down below for you guys just so you can get them. Because I would just make those over and over and over.
Yes.
This like giant spinach and artichoke pretzel was a great idea. And I loved it. But then like I added cream cheese. And I would make it with more filling and stuff like that if I did it again. So anyways, super, like if you're in a rut with your cooking, I highly recommend this book because it will give you new ideas and it will give you ideas of combinations of things to go together. And maybe you'll just love the recipes as is, or you can kind of like shift stuff around and be like, oh, that combination sounds incredible. I'm going to look up something that uses that combination of flavors. So that's brought a lot of fun into our dishes this quarter because we haven't eaten a lot of the same meals this quarter.
Yeah. And what's great, so was that not one of the 52 ways to wow your husband? Because you've been wowing me with your cooking. Was it in there or was it not?
Stop. No.
No? Okay. See, there you go.
Wow me
You've
all
got
the
way
time.
more than 52 ways to wow me. And I'm experiencing them all the time.
You're one to talk. Elisha wows me all the time. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, why don't we wrap this thing up, huh? Folks, thank you all so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.